The only break in the monotony was the shimmering, translucent barrier that kept him caged. It pulsed faintly, a curtain of energy that crackled if he moved too close. Beyond it, standing in rigid silence, was a single guard, a towering Zalvarian soldier whose glossy black exoskeleton seemed more like armor than flesh. The alien's multifaceted eyes never blinked, each one catching and refracting the pale light of the cell. It was like being studied by a predatory insect. Marcus sat on the narrow metal bench bolted to the floor, his wrists bound by restraints that pinched the skin. He had been told these were forged from char steel, unbreakable by any prisoner's strength. They were heavier than they looked, the weight of them making even small movements awkward. He was a long way from home. 3 weeks earlier, he'd been flying a deep-range scouting mission in the Terran Navy vessel Resolute. The assignment was simple enough: chart a new trade corridor through contested space near the Orion Gate, far from the official borders of both the Terran Republic and the Zalvarian Empire. But the galaxy had a way of making simple into deadly. The ambush had been fast and brutal. Zalvarian warships fell on the Resolute like wolves on a wounded animal, tearing through its shields in seconds. Most of the crew didn't survive the first salvo. Those who did either died in the firestorms that followed or were slaughtered during the boarding action. Marcus had been one of the unlucky few taken alive not for mercy, but because the Zalvarians valued living prisoners as trophies. Terrans especially. He had been interrogated twice. Not for information, he knew that by the nature of their questions, but for curiosity. The Zalvarians liked to see how far they could push before something broke. He had given them nothing. Now, days later, the monotony of captivity had settled, broken only by the occasional change of guard. The soldier outside never moved except to rotate his head with a slow, deliberate precision. It was unnerving, but Marcus had trained himself not to flinch. This morning, though, something changed. The guard stepped aside. In his place appeared a smaller figure, cloaked in deep navy fabric trimmed with silver. The newcomer's movements were graceful, measured too elegant for a soldier. Marcus caught the faint, silvery sheen of her exoskeleton beneath the cloak. Paler than the coal-black armor of the guards, she walked up to the barrier and stopped. Her eyes, larger and more luminous than any soldier's, studied him in silence. The seconds dragged. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You lost? I'm not the gift shop." She didn't react to the sarcasm. Instead, with a flick of her clawed hand, she keyed a sequence into the panel by the barrier. The energy field shimmered, then collapsed with a soft hump, leaving nothing but empty air between them. Marcus tensed. This was unusual. She stepped inside. Up close, Marcus could see details the dim light hadn't revealed. Her silver chiton was patterned with faint, almost iridescent lines like veins of crystal. Her face was sharp and angular, but her gaze carried something he hadn't seen in any of her kind before: hesitation. "You are human?" she asked, her voice soft, almost careful. Marcus tilted his head, curious. "Last I checked." She looked down briefly, then back into his eyes. Her hands twitched, claws flexing as if she was wrestling with something she didn't dare say. Finally, her voice dropped to a whisper. "They told me you were just a prisoner, but you can't be real." Marcus studied her, unsure where this was going. "What do you mean?" She took a slow breath, her mandibles clicking faintly in what seemed like nervousness. When she spoke again, the words carried the weight of someone repeating something forbidden. "You're not real, you're a legend." Her gaze didn't waver. In that moment, Marcus realized something unsettling. Whatever this was, it wasn't just an interrogation. This young alien had stepped into his cell because she needed to see him. Not as an enemy, not even as a soldier, but as something out of her people's oldest, most dangerous stories, and now she wasn't sure if she wanted the legend to be true. The alien girl stood in the center of his cell as though she'd stepped into a place she wasn't meant to be. Her gaze darted to the still active cameras in the corners, then back to his face. She took a cautious step closer, lowering her voice, until it was barely louder than the faint hum of the walls. In our history, she began slowly, there are old stories told to Zalvarian hatchlings. Most call them myths, nursery tales meant to frighten the arrogant into caution. Marcus smirked. So, like a boogeyman? Her eyes narrowed slightly. A warning about the apostate son. Marcus leaned back on the bench, testing the name. In his mind, never heard of it. You wouldn't have, she said, her voice gaining an edge of intensity. It is the destroyer that comes when empires grow too proud. A being of flesh, not metal. Small, fragile, yet it survives the impossible, kills the unkillable. And when it moves, entire civilizations vanish. Marcus's smirk widened. Sounds a little dramatic. But she didn't smile. Her gaze was steady, almost searching. The apostate son is not a machine, not a god, not a starship. It is a human. That made Marcus pause. His eyes narrowed. And you think that's me? I don't think, she said firmly. No. Marcus laughed once, a short, humorless sound. Kid, I'm just a lieutenant who got shot down. If I was some galaxy-ending monster, I wouldn't be sitting here in your cell. Her mandibles clicked faintly, an involuntary sign of agitation. Do you believe our empire takes chances with myths? They only kept you alive this long because they were deciding whether the risk of killing you outweighed the risk of letting you exist. He studied her more closely. There was no mockery in her tone, no jest. She meant every word. She took another step closer. When I was small, the elders told of the firestorm on Carthus IV, an inferno that consumed a fleet and 3 orbital cities in hours. The Empire said it was an accident. The legend said it was the apostate son. Was that you? Marcus's expression shifted. The name Carthus IV stirred memories he'd tried to bury. Blazing skies, deafening explosions, civilians screaming as the ground split beneath them. The destruction hadn't been intentional. It was a fuel depot chain reaction, triggered during an evacuation. He'd barely made it out alive. Yet here, in Zalvarian lore, it had transformed into an apocalyptic act of will. I was there, he said finally, voice quiet, her breath hitched. And what about the Varan pit? She pressed. The unbreachable prison? My people say you were thrown into its depths and walked out 2 cycles later, leaving only corpses behind. Marcus shrugged. Walked out is generous. I crawled, and they started it. Siva, though he still didn't know her name, yet stared at him as if the final piece of a puzzle had just clicked into place. Her trembling hands stilled. It's all true, she whispered. The fleets you outmaneuvered. The warlords. You crippled. The way every battle you fight seems to tilt the universe against your enemies. You are the apostate son. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. And if I am, what then? You going to run screaming? Call your guards? Something flickered in her expression conflict. Loyalty to her empire battled with something deeper, awe. I don't know, she admitted. All I know is I needed to see you for myself, to know if the stories were real. And now? Marcus asked. She hesitated, her voice trembling. Now I'm not sure if I wanted them to be. Marcus studied her for a long moment. This wasn't a soldier trying to intimidate him. This wasn't even an interrogator. This was someone who had risked punishment, maybe death, to step into his cell and confront a living myth, and beneath her fear was a strange, dangerous truth. If she believed the legend, then she also believed that killing him might only make Things worse for her people. Marcus smiled faintly, leaning back again. Then I guess you've got a decision to make, haven't you? She didn't answer, but the silence between them was heavy, charged with something that felt far larger than just a prisoner and a curious stranger. In her mind, the line between man and myth had blurred, and Marcus had the unsettling feeling that she wasn't the only one who believed the legend was real. Marcus had learned to recognize the subtle cues of Zalvarian routine, the deep, insect-like footsteps of the guards, the faint electric crackle when the energy barrier deactivated, the quick inspection of his restraints before they left him to stew. But this time, none of those things happened. The footsteps were softer, quicker, as if the person walking was trying not to be heard. When she stepped inside, Marcus recognized her immediately, the pale silver chitin, the faint, crystalline patterns along her arms, the same unblinking, luminous eyes that had whispered the word legend to him only hours before. Her cloak was gone now, replaced by a fitted vest-like garment with multiple hidden pockets. In one hand she held something that looked like a narrow black rod with pulsing red lines running its length. "You're back," Marcus said quietly, keeping his voice low. "You don't have much time," she replied. Her voice, though hushed, carried a sharp urgency. "They've decided. You're to be executed in the central atrium tomorrow publicly, with the High Warlord in attendance." Marcus's brow furrowed. "So I'm the opening act at a death parade?" She didn't respond to the sarcasm. Instead, she stepped forward and pressed the rod against his wrist restraints. There was a brief snap of energy, and the shackles fell open with a dull metallic clink. Marcus flexed his wrists, blood rushing back into them. That's one problem solved. Now what's the catch? Her mandibles clicked softly. If the legend is true, I am choosing to be remembered as the one who set it free, not the one who watched it die. Brave, Marcus said, though his voice carried both respect and caution. But you realize once we're out of here, your people will brand you a traitor. She hesitated. If I stay, I will still be a traitor to myself. Marcus held her gaze for a moment, then he stood. All right, kid, lead the way. The corridors outside the cell were dim and narrow, lined with conduits that pulsed faintly with power. She led him along a path that seemed intentionally erratic, doubling back once, ducking into a side hallway, pausing in shadow until a pair of black armored guards passed by. Marcus could feel the tension in the air. Every turn was a gamble. The ship, or perhaps the station, was alive with activity, the vibrations of heavy machinery running through the metal under his boots. Somewhere far away, the muffled thrum of engines or reactor cores reminded him that this wasn't neutral ground. It was the beating heart of Zalvarian territory. She moved with certainty, slipping between blind spots in the wall-mounted surveillance. Nodes. Maintenance routes, she explained in a whisper. The guards don't patrol them often. They reached a junction where the floors sloped downward into a wider tunnel. A faint, cold draft carried with it the unmistakable tang of fuel vapors. That's the docking bay, she said, one deck down. The bay was quieter than Marcus expected, just the faint hum of idling machinery and the occasional hiss of pressurized seals adjusting. Rows of craft lined the far wall, but she was steering him toward the smaller, less conspicuous skiffs. They were halfway across the open floor when the alarms went off. A deafening, insect-like chittering voice blared. From the overhead speakers, "Escape attempt section 12. Seal all exits." Siva froze. Marcus grabbed her arm. "Move!" They sprinted toward the nearest skiff, the sharp clatter of armored footsteps echoing from the upper walkways. Red lights began to strobe, painting the bay in pulses of warning color. A shadow dropped from the catwalk above, a Zalvarian guard, spear-like weapon raised. Marcus barely broke stride, pivoting just enough to grab the shaft mid-swing. With a violent yank, He pulled the alien forward and smashed his forehead into the creature's faceplate. The sound of cracking armor echoed, like breaking glass. The guard crumpled. Siva stared for a split second too long, her eyes wide. She had seen warriors fight before, but nothing like this, nothing so fast, so deliberate, so brutal. Marcus didn't wait for her to recover. He tossed the spear aside, snatched a sidearm from the fallen guard's belt, and pressed it into her. Claws. Shoot anyone who's not me. More guards poured in from the far side of the bay, their weapons glowing with a dangerous bluish light. Marcus sprinted, weaving through crates and fuel lines, closing the distance to the skiff. One guard lunged at him. Marcus ducked low, hooked an arm around the alien's midsection, and used its own momentum to slam it into a bulkhead hard enough to leave a dent. By the time they reached the skiff's ramp, Siva was breathing hard, not from the run, but from the realization dawning in her mind. This wasn't just a man running for his life. This was a predator, and the battlefield bent around him. They stumbled aboard, Marcus diving into the pilot's seat. Hold on. The engines roared to life and the craft jolted forward, the docking clamps releasing with a metallic snap. As they surged toward the bay's exit, plasma fire streaked past, close enough to leave molten scars across the skiff's hull. The targeting alarm shrieked. Siva's claws dug into the armrest beside her. We won't clear the shields. Watch me, Marcus said, his voice calm in a way that felt almost unnatural given the chaos around them. But before they could break free, the first wave of Zalvarian interceptors dropped from the ceiling-mounted launch racks. Sleek, insect-like craft-black chitin hulls glinting under the red warning lights fanned out to block the exit. Hold on to something, Marcus warned. He didn't go for the open space between them. He went straight at the nearest ship. At the last moment, he cut thrust and rolled the skiff sideways, scraping their hull against the enemy craft. The grinding collision threw the interceptor off course and sent it slamming into its wingman in a flash of blue-white sparks. 2 down. The remaining craft opened fire, streaks of plasma turning the air into a storm of molten light. Marcus wove. The skiff threw it like a man threading a needle in a hurricane. Siva risked a glance back toward the docking bay entrance and froze. More guards were pouring into the hangar, and 2 had already leapt onto the skiff's hull, talons digging into the plating as they climbed toward the cockpit. They're on us, she shouted. Marcus slammed the control on the console, and the skiff's dorsal turret rotated with a whirring growl. Then get rid of them. Her claws hesitated over the controls just long enough for one of the boarders to slam a clawed hand against the viewport. His alien face was inches away from hers, mandibles flaring in rage. Siva's hesitation vanished. She gripped the firing handle and squeezed. The turret roared, a rapid stream of white-hot rounds shredding the boarders in a spray of molten chitin and sparks. When the last body slid off the hull, she exhaled shakily. Not bad, Marcus said without looking. Keep that up. The bay's outer force field shimmered ahead, a translucent barrier that would keep them trapped unless the docking control node was destroyed. Marcus spotted it, a tall spire of alien alloy bristling with energy conduits mounted on the right wall just before the shield. He aimed the skiff directly at it. Siva's eyes widened. That's solid armor. Well, Marcus cut her off. Relax, I'm only mostly crazy. At the last possible second, he jerked the controls and rolled the skiff onto its side, bringing the ventral cannon into line. He fired in a continuous stream, chewing through the conduits until one overloaded and erupted in a burst of white flame. The shield flickered once, twice, and collapsed. They shot through the opening into the black void beyond. Freedom lasted less than 10 seconds. A pair of Zalvarian cruisers were already vectoring toward them from high orbit, their hulls bristling with weapon arrays. Behind them, Smaller corvettes fanned out to cut off any escape route. Marcus's face stayed maddeningly calm. "All right," he muttered. "Let's make them think twice." He swung the skiff toward the lead cruiser and opened fire not to damage it, but to draw attention. Plasma bolts from the skiff's cannon splashed against the cruiser's forward shields, barely making a dent, but the maneuver had its intended effect. The Zalvarian formation broke, corvettes surging forward to engage. That was when Marcus threaded the skiff between them, riding the narrow space where their targeting systems wouldn't risk hitting each other. The result was Chaos corvettes firing wildly, missing him and striking their own formation. Within seconds, 3 ships were burning, one spinning out of control toward the planet's atmosphere. Inside the cockpit, Siva stared at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time. His eyes were sharp, his hands steady, every movement purposeful. There was no panic, no second-guessing, only a cold, terrifying precision. She remembered the legends, the human who survived impossible battles, who turned fleets into graveyards. And now, sitting beside him, she knew why her people had feared. The apostate sun for generations. The remaining corvettes pulled back, regrouping with the cruisers. Marcus didn't wait for them to recover. He angled the skiff toward the asteroid belt at the system's edge. "They won't follow us in there," Siva said. "They will," Marcus corrected. "But they'll regret it." He pushed the engines to full burn, the skiff vibrating as the stars stretched into streaks of light. For a brief moment, the cockpit fell silent except for the hum of the drive. Siva turned to him, her voice low. "It's true, isn't it?" Marcus didn't answer, but the faint smirk on his face told her enough. The air in the chamber was thick, almost tangible, as if the weight of centuries had settled upon it. The alien commander's words still echoed in every corner of the great hall. "You're not real, you're a legend." But now, the silence was gone. In its place came the slow, deliberate sound of human boots on stone, a sound so out of place in a galaxy ruled by silent hovercraft and whispering machines that it made every alien spine tighten. Commander Vera stood frozen, her hand still hovering near the hilt of her ceremonial blade. Her warriors had their weapons ready, but none dared fire. In the center of the room, the human Elias Kane stood tall, his shoulders squared, and his eyes burning with something more ancient than the empires that surrounded him. "Do you?" "No," Elias began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of something primal. "Why your people call me a legend?" No one answered. They couldn't. He continued. "It's because when humanity was cut off from the stars, we didn't fade away. We didn't surrender. We trained, we prepared, we waited." Vera's throat tightened. She had read the sealed archives, the forbidden histories that described Earth as a death world, whose inhabitants could endure climates and conditions that would kill most species in seconds. She had also read the whispered accounts of the Phoenix Protocol, the human contingency plan that, if triggered, would awaken warriors that hadn't been seen in centuries. And now one of them stood before her. Around them, alien dignitaries and soldiers shifted uneasily. The great galactic powers had come to this fortress world to finalize their conquest, expecting resistance, but not this. They had thought humanity's legends were exaggeration stories told to frighten children or inspire soldiers. But Elias was not a story. He was the living embodiment of the human myth. "You came here," Elias said, slowly stepping forward, "believing that you had won, that humanity had been broken, scattered, enslaved." His gaze swept the hall, meeting the eyes of alien warlords, merchants, and politicians. "But legends are born from truth. And the truth is, you've made a mistake that can't be undone." He reached to his side and unhooked something from his belt. It was a simple object, at least to alien eyes, a small metal box etched with deep grooves and strange runes. Vera's eyes widened. She recognized it instantly. An Earth War beacon. Legend said these devices were banned by every known galactic treaty. They were markers, beacons capable of sending a signal far beyond conventional communication straight to the hidden human fleets scattered in uncharted space. A call to arms that could not be stopped, jammed, or ignored. No, Vera breathed, realization dawning too late. You wouldn't. Elias pressed the activation rune. The box emitted a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the bones of every living thing in the chamber. Somewhere impossibly far away, buried human warships stirred in forgotten asteroid fields. Long dormant engines roared to life. Hidden colonies began their final preparations. The galaxy's greatest nightmare had just been set in motion. You thought the war was over, Elias said, his voice low but lethal. It hasn't even begun. The alien delegation erupted into chaos, some shouting, some drawing weapons, others scrambling for the exits. But Vera didn't move. She could only stare at him, the man who was supposed to be a myth. She felt something strange then, an unfamiliar mix of awe and dread. Why? She asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the uproar. Why reveal yourself now? Elias looked at her for a long moment before answering. Because there comes a time when hiding in the shadows isn't enough. Legends inspire, but reality changes everything. And then he stepped past her, walking through the chaos without fear. No one dared stop him. Outside, the skies above the alien capital began to shift. A ripple, like the shimmer of heat, spread across the clouds as massive angular shapes began to descend. They were not alien ships. They were human warcraft, sleek, black, and bristling with weapons no one in the galaxy had ever seen before.